Callum Hayes sat in his small repair shop, wiping the grease off his hands as he stared at the broken plasma regulator in front of him. The colony world of Voss 7 was a rough place, but it was home. He had come here looking for work as an engineer, but business was slow. Most people preferred the big companies for repairs, leaving independent workers like him struggling. The door chimed, signaling a visitor. Callum looked up, expecting another desperate customer wanting repairs on credit. Instead, he saw Orin, an old Zalviran merchant. Orin was well known in the colony, mostly for owing money to the wrong people. Callum leaned back in his chair. Orin, if you're here to ask for a favor, I'm not in the mood. The old alien's silver eyes flickered with nervous energy as he stepped inside, his long cloak swaying with each careful step. Callum Hayes, he said, voice slow and deliberate. I have a business proposal for you. Callum sighed, folding his arms. Unless this proposal involves paying me for actual work, I'm not interested. Orin hesitated before finally speaking. I owe a debt, one I cannot repay with credits. Callum raised an eyebrow. Not my problem. Orin exhaled slowly. I am offering my daughter as payment. Silence filled the room. Callum stared at the alien, waiting for him to laugh or explain that this was some kind of misunderstanding. But Orin remained serious. Callum finally scoffed. Are you joking? Orin shook his head. No joke. You see, my debt is to Scarith, a powerful crime lord. He has given me two choices. Pay him or give him my daughter, Selna. If she falls into his hands, she will never be free again. Callum frowned. So you're just passing her to someone else. That doesn't make it any better. Orin's shoulders slumped. I am an old man with nothing left, but I have seen you, Callum. You are not like the others. You have honor. You would not harm her. Callum rubbed his temples. This was not his problem. He was just an engineer, trying to keep his business running. He had nothing to do with alien debts or crime lords. Let's say I take her in, Callum said slowly. Then what? You think Scarith will just forget? Orin's expression darkened. No, but it will buy her time. Time to disappear. Time to build a new life. Callum still didn't like this. He didn't own people, and he certainly wasn't about to take responsibility for someone forced into this mess. Then the door slammed open. A tall figure entered, dressed in dark armor, his eyes scanning the room like a predator searching for prey. One of Scarith's enforcers. Orin. The enforcer growled, his voice sharp as a blade. Time's up. Orin flinched but stood firm. I have made a deal. The debt is settled. The enforcer's gaze shifted to Callum. A human? You think the boss will accept this? Callum clenched his fists. He has no choice, does he? The enforcer stepped forward. You have no idea what you're getting into, human. If you interfere in Scarith's business, you make yourself a target. Callum glanced at Orin, then back at the enforcer. He hated getting involved, but leaving Selna to this kind of life was worse. He exhaled sharply. Fine. She stays with me. The enforcer sneered but didn't argue. He turned on his heel and left without another word. Orin sighed in relief. Thank you, Callum. You have done more than you know. Before Callum could respond, Orin turned toward the door and gestured. A tall Zalviran woman stepped inside, her posture stiff, her silver eyes burning with anger. This is my daughter, Selna, Orin said. She is yours now. Selna crossed her arms. I belong to no one. Callum sighed. Great, this is going to be fun. Callum stared at Selna, the tall Zalviran woman standing before him with crossed arms and an icy glare. He had seen plenty of aliens before, but something about her presence felt different. She carried herself like a warrior, proud, controlled, and very, very angry. Orin, her father, had just handed her over as a way to settle his debt. But Selna clearly had no intention of accepting that decision. I belong to no one, she repeated, her voice sharp as a blade. Callum exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Great. Then we agree on something. Salma narrowed her silver eyes. Then why did you accept me? Callum shook his head. Look, I didn't want this deal, but your father was desperate, and I wasn't about to let you get taken by Scarith's enforcers. Salma's expression hardened. I can handle myself. Callum raised an eyebrow. Really? Because from what I saw, you were about to be taken whether you liked it or not. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Orin, who had been silent, finally spoke. Salma, please. This is the only way to keep you safe. Salma turned on him, her voice filled with betrayal. You think giving me to a human is keeping me safe? Orin sighed, his face full of regret. Callum is a good man. He will not harm you. He is giving you a chance. Salma took a deep breath and looked at Callum again. Suspicion and frustration burned in her eyes. Callum rolled his eyes. Look, I don't need this drama. You can stay here for now. I won't stop you if you want to leave later. Salma studied him, as if searching for a hidden trick. When she found nothing, she gave a slow nod. Fine, but let's be clear, human, I am not your responsibility. Callum smirked. Trust me, I don't want that responsibility either. Orin smiled faintly. Thank you, Callum. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door, leaving them alone. A tense start. The silence between Callum and Salma stretched. She stood in his workshop, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like a prisoner forced into a cell. Callum sighed and gestured toward a small cot in the corner. That's where you can sleep. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. Salma didn't move. I don't need your charity. Callum shook his head. It's not charity. It's an option. You can sleep there or on the floor. Your choice. For a moment, it seemed like she would refuse just to spite him. But then, with a huff, she walked over and sat on the cot. She ran her fingers over the fabric, frowning slightly. Human materials are strange, she muttered. Callum chuckled. Yeah. Well, we don't have Zalviran silk and all that fancy stuff here. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. You think I grew up in luxury? Callum shrugged. I don't know. But I do know that you're not used to being helped. Salma's fingers twitched, but she said nothing. A rough first night. Callum got back to work, trying to ignore the fact that an alien woman who didn't trust him was now in his living space. He focused on repairing a broken plasma coil, but he could feel Salma's sharp gaze on him the entire time. After an hour, he sighed. You're really going to sit there and stare at me all night? Salma leaned back against the cot. I don't trust you. Callum snorted. Yeah, I got that part. She tilted her head. Humans are unpredictable. Callum smirked. So are Zalvarans, apparently. A pause. Then, surprisingly, Salma let out a small, half-amused scoff. It wasn't much, but it was the first crack in the tension between them. The threat arrives. Callum was just starting to relax when the door suddenly buzzed. Someone was outside. His stomach tightened. It was late. No one visited this part of the colony unless they had a reason. Salma was on her feet instantly, moving with the grace of a trained fighter. Who is it? She whispered. Callum grabbed his shock baton from the workbench and checked the monitor. His suspicion was correct. Outside stood 3 Zalviran enforcers, Scarith's men. One of them stepped forward and spoke into the intercom. We know you have the girl, human. Open the door. Salma stiffened, her fists clenched. Callum glanced at her, then back at the monitor. You've got the wrong place, he called back, keeping his voice calm but firm. The enforcer grinned. Lying doesn't suit your kind. Let us in, or we'll come in anyway. Callum sighed and looked at Salma. Well, looks like you staying here just became a bigger problem. Salma smirked, her silver eyes burning with defiance. I never run from a fight. Callum exhaled, and tightened his grip on the baton. Great, neither do I. The air inside Callum's workshop felt heavy with tension. Outside, 3 Zalveran enforcers waited, their sharp eyes scanning the entrance. Callum knew they weren't here to negotiate. Selna clenched her fists, her silver eyes burning with defiance. We can't let them in. Callum sighed. Yeah, no kidding. He tightened his grip on the shock baton in his hand. They're not leaving without you. Selna smirked. Then they'll be disappointed. A loud pounding rattled the door. Last warning, human. Open up, or we'll tear it down. Callum's mind raced. His shop wasn't built like a fortress. If they forced their way in, he and Selna would be trapped. He needed an escape plan. Fast. He turned to her. How good are you at running? Selna rolled her shoulders. Better than you, I'm sure. Great. Let's find out. The escape. Callum grabbed a tool case from the counter and pressed a hidden switch underneath it. A hatch behind his workbench slid open, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel. Selna raised an eyebrow. You have a secret exit. Callum grinned. You think I survived this colony without one? The pounding at the door turned into a loud crash as the enforcers began forcing their way in. No time for questions, Callum said, pulling Selna into the tunnel. He sealed the hatch behind them just as the door shattered. Inside the tunnel, the air was damp, filled with the smell of metal and oil. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for 2 people. Callum led the way, moving quickly through the dimly lit corridor. Selna followed close behind, her breathing steady. Where does this lead? Outskirts of the colony, Callum said. Away from those guys. They pushed forward, but Callum could already hear movement above them. The enforcers weren't wasting time. They were scanning the area, trying to track them down. The hunt begins. When they reached the tunnel's exit, Callum peeked out cautiously. The colony streets were quiet, but he knew that wouldn't last. If Scareth had men watching, they needed to keep moving. Selna stepped out beside him, her sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. We need a distraction. Callum nodded. Agreed. But what kind? Selna thought for a moment before her lips curled into a mischievous grin. Something loud. Callum followed her gaze and groaned when he saw what she was looking at, a row of fuel canisters stacked near a supply station. Oh no, he muttered. I know that look. Selna grabbed a small ignition device from Callum's tool belt. You wanted a distraction. Before he could argue, she flicked the switch and tossed the device at the fuel canisters. Boom! A massive explosion lit up the colony streets, sending flames and debris into the air. Alarms began blaring, and the entire district erupted into chaos. Selna grabbed Callum's wrist. Now we run. Callum sighed but followed, sprinting through the panicked streets. The chase. The explosion did its job. The enforcers were thrown into confusion, scrambling to investigate. But Callum and Selna's luck didn't last long. A deep voice roared behind them. There, the girl and the human. They turned to see 2 enforcers pushing through the smoke, their weapons drawn. Selna's eyes gleamed with excitement. Finally, a fight. Callum groaned. Can we avoid getting shot for at least 5 minutes? Selna didn't answer. She lunged forward, moving with inhuman speed. The first enforcer swung his weapon, but she ducked, twisting around him and slamming an elbow into his side. The alien staggered, giving Selna just enough time to snatch his weapon and strike him in the back of the head. Callum barely had time to react before the second enforcer charged him. Instinct took over. Callum dodged the attack and jammed his shock baton into the enforcer's side. A surge of electricity crackled, sending the alien to the ground, groaning. Selna smirked. Not bad, human. Callum huffed. Let's keep moving before more show up. They disappeared into the alleys, blending into the shadows. A safe hideout. After running for what felt like hours, they finally reached an abandoned storage unit on the outskirts of the colony. Callum locked the door behind them. exhaling sharply. We should be safe here, for now. Selna paced the room, still full of energy. We need a plan. Scarith won't stop hunting me. Callum leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead. Yeah, I figured that part out already. She looked at him, serious now. You didn't have to fight back there. You could have let them take me. Callum met her gaze. I'm not that kind of guy. A pause. For the first time, Selma looked at him with something other than suspicion, maybe even a little respect. She sighed. Then we fight together. Callum smirked. That's the spirit. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The storage unit was cold and dimly lit, filled with rusted containers and broken machinery. Callum sat against the wall, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Across from him, Selna paced restlessly, her sharp silver eyes scanning every corner of the room. Callum exhaled and wiped sweat from his forehead. You ever stop moving? Selna shot him a glare. Do you ever stop talking? Callum smirked. Fair enough. Silence settled between them. It had been a long night, full of running, fighting, and nearly getting captured. Scarith's enforcers were still hunting them, and Callum knew they wouldn't stop. We need a plan, Selna finally said, leaning against a crate. We can't keep running forever. Callum nodded. Agreed. But first, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small energy ration pack, tossing it to her. Eat something. You look like you're about to fall over. Selna caught the ration but hesitated. I don't need. Just eat it, Callum interrupted. You won't win any fights if you pass out from hunger. Selna narrowed her eyes but tore open the packet. She took a small bite, her expression unreadable. Callum grinned. See, not so bad, right? Selna chewed slowly. It tastes like plastic. Callum chuckled. Yeah, welcome to human survival food. For the first time, her expression softened slightly, almost as if she was amused. Learning to trust. As she finished eating, Callum leaned forward. All right, let's talk strategy. Scarith's enforcers aren't just gonna give up. Selna nodded. He won't stop until I'm back under his control. My father's debt was large. Scarith sees me as his property now. Callum frowned. Well, that's not happening. We need a way to end this. Selna studied him. Why do you care so much, human? You barely know me. Callum sighed, leaning back against the wall. Because I've seen what happens when people like Scarith take what they want. I'm not about to stand by and let that happen again. Selna tilted her head. You lost someone, didn't you? Callum hesitated. Yeah, a long time ago. She didn't press for details, and he was grateful for that. Instead, she asked, do you have a plan? Callum tapped his fingers on his knee. There's an old security station near the outskirts. If we can get in, we can wipe our identities from the colony's records. That'll make it harder for them to track us. Selna nodded. Smart, but it won't be easy. Callum smirked. Nothing ever is. Breaking into the security station. A few hours later, they moved through the shadows of the colony, avoiding patrols and scanning drones. The security station was a small, heavily fortified building, but Callum knew a way inside. Selna crouched beside him behind a stack of crates, her body tense and ready. Tell me you have a plan. Callum grinned. Of course, just follow my lead. Selna sighed. That's not comforting. Callum pulled out a small hacking device and activated it. The security gate buzzed and unlocked. They slipped inside, moving carefully through the halls. Callum whispered, All right, the database should be just ahead. We erase ourselves, and we're out. Selna glanced at him. No alarms yet. You might actually know what you're doing. Callum chuckled. See, you're learning to trust me. She rolled her eyes but said nothing. A dangerous turn. They reached the main server room, and Callum quickly began hacking the system. Selna stood near the entrance, keeping watch. Hurry up. Relax, it's almost. The alarm suddenly blared, red lights flashing around them. Selna cursed. You were saying? Callum groaned. Someone must have upgraded security. We got company. Selna drew her stolen weapon just as the door burst open. A group of enforcers stormed inside, weapons raised. There's no escape this time, one of them growled. Callum sighed. I really hate these guys. Selna smirked. Then let's take them down. The fight for freedom. The first enforcer lunged at Selna, but she dodged smoothly, twisting behind him and slamming a strike into his back. Callum wasn't as fast, but he managed to dodge a punch and counter with his shock baton, sending an enforcer crashing to the floor. One of them aimed a blaster at Selna. Callum didn't think, he just acted. He grabbed a metal pipe and threw it at the enforcer's weapon, knocking it off target just as the shot fired. Selna used the distraction to take the enforcer down, flipping him over her shoulder. Callum huffed. You're welcome. Selna smirked. I had it under control. Callum rolled his eyes. Sure you did. They rushed to the console, Callum finishing the data wipe just in time. Done. Let's move. They ran out, dodging more guards as they escaped into the night. A new understanding. Back in their hideout, Callum sat on the floor, catching his breath. Well, that was fun. Selna smirked. For you, maybe. Callum looked at her seriously. You held your own back there. Selna met his gaze. So did you. A pause. Then, for the first time, Selna extended her hand. We fight well together, human. Callum grinned and shook her hand. Yeah, we do. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. Together. The hideout was quiet, but neither Callum nor Selna could relax. They had erased their identities from the colony's records, but Scareth's enforcers weren't giving up. The bounty on Selna's head was too valuable. Callum sat against the wall, thinking. His body ached from their last fight, but his mind was racing. They needed to end this, for good. Selna, sitting across from him, broke the silence. We can't keep running forever. Callum sighed. You're right. We need another plan. Selna smirked. For a human, you're learning fast. Callum chuckled. And for an alien, you're finally listening to me. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Callum leaned forward. I know someone who might help us. An old friend of your father. He has connections, maybe enough to clear your debt without bloodshed. Selna narrowed her eyes. You trust him? Callum hesitated. Not completely. But we don't have many options. Selna exhaled. Fine. But if this goes wrong? Callum smirked. Yeah, you'll break my ribs or something. Selna raised an eyebrow. Or worse. A risky meeting. The next day, they made their way to a small docking station on the outskirts of the colony. Callum's contact, Drix, was waiting for them. A short, stocky alien with 4 arms and a permanent smirk. Drix had once been a smuggler, and, more importantly, he owed Callum a favor. Drix's bright yellow eyes flicked between them. Callum Hayes. Haven't seen you in a while. Callum crossed his arms. I need a favor. Drix grinned. Of course you do. And I assume this lovely lady is the reason. Selna stepped forward, her presence commanding. You know who I am. Drix chuckled. Oh, everyone knows who you are, sweetheart. Scareth put a big price on your head. Selna's expression darkened. Then you know why we need your help. Drix rubbed his chin, pretending to think. Well, clearing a debt like that. Not cheap. Callum narrowed his eyes. Drix, don't mess with me. Can you help or not? Drix sighed. Fine. There's a way to clear the debt, but it's risky. We need to get to Scareth's main vault and destroy his records. Selna crossed her arms. That vault is heavily guarded. Drix smirked. That's why it's a bad idea. Callum frowned. Then why are you telling us this? Drix's smirk widened. Because I love bad ideas. Selna exhaled. Then let's do it. The betrayal. Drix led them through the colony, guiding them toward a hidden entrance to Scarith's vault. Callum felt uneasy. Something about this felt wrong. Selna sensed it too. Something isn't right, she whispered. Callum nodded. Stay ready. They reached a dark alley near the vault entrance. Drix stopped suddenly and turned to them. All right, he said. Change of plans. Before Callum could react, Drix pulled out a small communicator. Got them, Drix said into the device. Suddenly, a dozen enforcers appeared, weapons drawn. Callum's stomach dropped. Selna's eyes burned with fury. You betrayed us. Drix shrugged. Nothing personal. Love. Just business. Scarith's paying more than your father ever could. Callum clenched his fists. You son of a... Before he could finish, one of the enforcers grabbed him, slamming him into a wall. Selna fought back instantly, dodging a stun blast and striking an enforcer in the face. But there were too many. Another enforcer hit her with an electric baton, and she collapsed to the ground, groaning. Callum struggled, but the enforcers overpowered him, forcing him to his knees. Drix shook his head. You should have taken a different path, Callum. Callum glared at him. And you should have picked a better side. Drix laughed. Oh, I did. You too. You're done. He turned to the enforcers. Take them to Scarith. Captured. Callum and Selna were thrown into a transport vehicle, their hands bound. Selna winced, still recovering from the stun baton. Callum leaned toward her. You okay? Selna gritted her teeth. I'll survive. Callum exhaled. I'm sorry. I should have seen this coming. Selna shook her head. We both should have. They sat in silence as the vehicle moved through the colony, heading straight toward Scarith's stronghold. Selna glanced at Callum. We're not done yet. Callum smirked. No, we're not. They might have been captured, but this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The transport vehicle rumbled forward, its metal interior shaking with every bump in the road. Callum sat with his hands bound behind his back, his head resting against the cold wall. Across from him, Selna sat still, her silver eyes burning with quiet rage. They were being taken to Scarith's stronghold, and their chances of escaping were slim. Callum exhaled slowly. So, any brilliant ideas? Selna smirked despite their situation. I was hoping you had one. Callum chuckled. I was afraid you'd say that. The two enforcers guarding them gave a low growl. Silence, human. Callum glanced at them. Right, because I'm totally going to sit quietly while being dragged to my possible execution. The enforcer narrowed his eyes. You talk too much. Selna leaned forward slightly. And you're too slow to stop him. The enforcer frowned. What? Before he could react, Selna kicked forward, slamming her foot into his knee. The enforcer stumbled back in pain, and that was all Callum needed. With one sharp movement, Callum twisted his hands, revealing the small knife he had hidden in his sleeve. With quick precision, he cut his restraints and lunged forward. The second enforcer reached for his weapon, but Callum was faster. He grabbed the enforcer's wrist and slammed his head forward, knocking the alien off balance. Selna freed herself in the same instant, grabbing the first enforcer's blaster and knocking him unconscious with the butt of the weapon. Callum wiped his forehead. Okay, that actually worked. Selna grinned. I told you. We fight well together. Callum smirked. Yeah. Let's get out of here. The escape begins. Callum peeked through the vehicle's small window. They were almost at Scarith's stronghold, a massive fortress surrounded by armed guards. We don't have much time, Callum muttered. Once we reach that place, we're done. Selna glanced at the front of the vehicle. Then we take control before we arrive. Callum nodded. Agreed. Let's go. Moving quickly, they crawled toward the driver's section. The moment Callum kicked open the door, the driver, a reptilian alien, spun around in surprise. Selna didn't hesitate. She lunged forward and struck the driver, knocking him out instantly. Callum slid into the driver's seat. All right, let's see if I remember how to. Suddenly, a loud banging came from the back. The enforcers they had knocked out were waking up. Selna looked at Callum. Time to move. Callum grinned. Hold on tight. He grabbed the controls and slammed his foot down on the accelerator. A high-speed chase. The transport vehicle sped forward, shaking as Callum took a sharp turn down a side road. Behind them, Scarith's enforcers noticed something was wrong. Alarms began blaring across the stronghold. Great, Callum muttered. Now the entire base knows we're here. Selna looked out the window. Multiple hoverbikes were now chasing them, enforcers holding blasters aimed at their vehicle. She grabbed a blaster and opened the side hatch. Keep driving. I'll handle them. Callum sighed. I was hoping you'd say that. Selna leaned out, aiming carefully before firing. The first enforcer's bike exploded in a ball of fire, sending the rider crashing onto the road. Callum swerved, dodging incoming fire. Any chance we make it out of this alive? Selna smirked. We'll see. She fired again, hitting another bike and sending it spinning out of control. Suddenly, a huge blockade appeared ahead, metal barriers and heavily armed guards waiting for them. Callum's eyes widened. We have a problem. Selna glanced ahead. Then let's make an entrance. Callum groaned. I was afraid you'd say that. He slammed his hand on the manual override, causing the vehicle's turbo boosters to activate. The transport lurched forward at full speed, heading straight for the blockade. The enforcers ahead scrambled to move, but it was too late. With a loud crash, the vehicle smashed through the barrier, sending debris flying everywhere. Callum and Selna were thrown forward, the vehicle flipping over from the impact. The final stand. Callum groaned, pushing himself up from the wreckage. Selna was already standing, blaster in hand. We need to move. They looked up to see Scarith himself standing at the entrance of the fortress, flanked by dozens of enforcers. The crime lord sneered. You've caused enough trouble, human. Callum dusted himself off. Yeah, that's kind of what I do. Scarith turned to his enforcers. Kill them. Callum sighed. I really hate this guy. Selna smirked. Then let's finish this. The two of them stood side by side, ready for battle. The final fight had begun.